إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله الله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا. أما بعد فيا عباد الله أوصي نفسي وأوصيكم بتقوى الله عز وجل. وقد قال الله جل في علا في القرآن العظيم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وبعد. We certainly begin by praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nahmaduhu, we compliment Him. Wa nasta'inuhu, and we ask Him for help. Wa nastaghfiruhu, and we beg for His forgiveness. Wa nu'minu bihi, and we believe in Him. Wa natawakkalu alayhi, and we put our trust completely in Allah. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to guide, no one can lead him astray. And whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to leave astray, nobody can guide that person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, O you who are committed to iman and faith, ittaqullaha haqqa tuqatihi. Be aware of your relationship with Allah and be afraid of breaking that relationship in a way that He deserves. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. And don't give yourself the opportunity to die except that you're a Muslim. My khutbah today revolves around the concept known as al-himmatul aliyah, also known as uluwul himma. What that means is to have a firm and high determination for the highest aspect of any endeavor that you undergo. So the Prophet ﷺ, he always wanted for every believer, for every Muslim, for you and I, when we undergo a task, whether it involves things of this dunya or it involves things of the akhirah, that the believer should always aim for the highest aspect of that aspiration. So when you're going to exert effort and energy towards any endeavor, whether it's business, or it's education, or it's family, or it's iman, or it's things of the akhirah, then you should set your aim at the highest mark. And that's where your vision should be. That's where your plan should be. That's where your objective should be. What's going to happen in reality is what's going to happen. And we always accept whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. And we have no control over the rest of the world, but we have complete control over our thoughts, our ideas, and the notions in our mind. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged us that when you plan for something and you set out for something, that your himmah, your intention, your concern, and your determination should be of the highest of whatever you're aiming towards. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ مَعَالِيَ الْأُمُورِ وَأَشْرَافَهَا وَيَكْرَهُ سَفْسَافَهَا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again in the context when you aim towards something, He loves when the believer aims for the highest of whatever he's endeavoring towards, working towards. And the most honorable and the most noble aspect of it. Even if he's not going to achieve it. But that's where your aim should be. That's where you should be looking. And he dislikes the trivial aspects of it. Like just settling for the bare minimum, just to go by, that's safsafaha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't like when you aim for that. When you aim down, you're looking down, instead you should be looking up. And this concept of having drive and determination for the highest of things is rooted in many ayat in the Quran. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands and encourages the believers, فَاسْتَبِقُوا بِالْخَيْرَاتِ. You should compete and race for all the good things. Whether it's good things of this dunya or good things of the akhirah. We should be competing towards that. And a competition is only as competitive, it's only as good as the competition between the people that are competing. So for there to be a true competition in things that are good, we need to have drive and determination towards attaining the highest of whatever good we're yearning towards. And for the good things of the akhirah, the good things in relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no scarcity of resources. So this is not like a cutthroat, bad competition where we try to put down other people and that brings us higher. But rather, when we're earning and aiming for the highest of paradise, for example, there's room for every single one of us to go there. In the highest, the most exclusive part of paradise, every single one of us can be there. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to compete with one another, it's to have day in and day out, to have a drive inside of ourselves where we're not becoming people that are complacent, people that are just living their life where you just do the routines. Basically, you live the same year after year. That's not the life of the believer. But he should be aiming, even if it's dunya things, aiming for the highest aspect of them. So whether it's education, or it's money, or it's power, or whatever the case may be, you should be aiming for the highest aspect of it. And shaitan comes, and he'll whisper to you, and he'll say, you can't get it. And he'll whisper to you, and he'll say, what's the point of asking for something that you can never ever get in life? And I'll address that in a little bit as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us concerning those thoughts. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other ayat, He says, سَابِقُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. That you should race, you should have this drive to compete with other people for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in this ayah, for the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of us are in a competition to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a friendly competition where when I excel, it encourages you to excel as well. And there's no scarcity of resources. We can all have the best of this dunya and the best of the hereafter, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best provider, and He gives without any accountability. He doesn't have to answer to anyone. And so when we compete, we encourage each other to compete in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of us are in a competition to see who's going to pray the most, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed. We're all in a competition to see who's going to have the best relationship with the Quran, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. Reading it day in and day out, memorizing it, living by it. We're all in a competition to see who's going to make their spouse the happiest spouse in this world, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. We're all in a competition to see who's going to serve their family the most, the way that the Prophet ﷺ did. And this is all worship. So I don't want to confine this concept of worship to simply what we think are typical aspects of worship, like praying or reading Quran. And although at times those are the best forms of worship, but worship is anything that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So we're all in this competition, and we can all become first place. But we need to have that drive. We can't become complacent, or we can't have apathy where we don't care about our future. But instead, we need to have a vision. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He prepares us for our very first obstacle. When you set out to think like that, to have a high determination and noble and lofty goals, shaitan is going to come to you and your laziness is going to react with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqra." Shaitan, he promises you only poverty. And he encourages you to follow your desires, to stay in your comfort zone. And that's the first obstacle that the human being faces when he aims high, is that shaitan comes and he says it's not realistic. That right now, for example, if you're donating $20 a month, or you're donating $100 a month, because that's what your budget or your monthly income allows you to do, there's nothing wrong for you setting a high goal and a high aspiration and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable you to donate $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month, even if it seems unrealistic. But for you to honestly ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a great reward and blessing in that. And that's the first step for it to even materialize. And that would necessitate that your income would grow as well. But you're a human being and you don't know the future. And shaitan wants you to think you know the future. Shaitan wants to tell you that, why would you ask Allah when you know this is not going to happen? When of course you don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, let alone 5 years from now. And people that are in much worse positions than you and I, who have less support from family or friends, who are born in poverty, born in areas where there's no potential like the potential that we have for education and career opportunities. There are people with much less opportunities that have accomplished much more than even our dreams can think of. So what's stopping you and I from even thinking to aim high for those noble and lofty and high aspirations? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in regards to Jannah, He says, وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. He says when He's talking about the pursuit of Jannah, al-firdaus al-a'la, aiming for Jannah, aiming for paradise, He says, let the people who are going to compete, let them compete. So there might be people in this room who want to go to Jannah, but they're not competing for Jannah. They don't have that drive and determination for Jannah. They're not included in this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever is going to compete, then let them give their heart and soul competing. Let them exert every effort they can, thinking of ways and coming up with ideas for attaining Jannah. Whether it is the typical forms of worship that we think about, but also creating maybe who's going to create the largest infrastructure that's going to give them the most perpetual good deeds even after they passed away. Maybe starting an institution or starting a school for the orphans or something along those lines. So we're all competing in that manner. And the Prophet ﷺ, in regards to Jannah, he said, if one of you is going to ask for Jannah, فَاسْأَلُوهُ الْفِرْدَوْسَ الْأَعْلَى. So even though you and I, if we got the lowest level of Jannah, it would still be absolutely amazing and we would be content and happy. And we can't imagine that sinners like us could get the highest form of Jannah like the prophets and the companions. But the Prophet ﷺ, he forbade us from thinking like that. And he told us that if you're going to ask Allah for Jannah, and of course every single one of us is always going to ask Allah for Jannah, he said, فَاسْأَلُوهُ الْفِرْدَوْسَ الْأَعْلَى. Then you better ask for the highest of paradise. And then he described al-Firdaus. It's the highest and the middle part of Jannah, and that's where the rivers of Jannah, that's where they begin. So when you ask Allah for Jannah, don't think to yourself that, okay, even if you give me the lowest, I'll accept it. Because of course you will. But when you ask Him, your aim should be at the absolute highest. That you should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for al-Firdaus al-A'la. So what's the benefit of aiming for something that's so high, in whether it's akhirah matters or matters of the dunya, if you have this notion that you might not attain it? Is there a benefit to even aspiring for something that great when you probably can't even attain that? The Prophet ﷺ, he told us the blessing of having this high determination, even if it never materializes. And I'll share two hadith like that. One is where the Prophet ﷺ, he said that when a Muslim makes a firm intention, a high aim towards something that's good, whether it's for the dunya or for the akhirah, even if he never gets the opportunity to act upon it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He still gives him a single reward for that good action. So we know that when you make an intention towards something, and the word that the Prophet ﷺ used was the word ham, which is a high, noble aspiration. So it's not just simply an intention, but more of a determination. Something that you think, and it's something that might be out of your comfort zone, and it's something that you're trying to reach, something that's higher, something that's better, something that's more good for your benefit and for the benefit of others. The Prophet ﷺ said, even if you don't get the opportunity to act upon it, so you want to do this amazing thing, but maybe you never get the opportunity to actually act upon it, you still get the reward, one single reward for that firm intention that you had. And when you have that firm intention and you act upon it, you get between 10 to 700 times the reward of that. And the ending of that hadith is when you have a firm intention towards something bad, you don't act upon it, then nothing is written from that bad action. And if you have a firm intention for something bad and you end up doing it, then you get that single one bad thing written for you. The Prophet also in another hadith, he also told us, Man sa'ala Allah ash-shahadata. Whoever asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to die as a shaheed, like the death of somebody who dies striving his entire effort, his body for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the battlefield, defending his religion. When somebody dies like that, we know the blessings that the shuhada have, the status that they have among the believers on the Day of Judgment and in Jannah, that when a believer asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that, and the Prophet ﷺ said, بِصِدْقٍ, he asks honestly and sincerely, even if you don't have the opportunity to ever engage in that and to ever act upon it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will give you the ranks and the position of the shuhada even if you die on your bed. So if I sincerely ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something that for my foreseeable future I could never imagine even having the opportunity to act on something like that or to have the platform to do that, but if I sincerely and honestly ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that, even if I die on my comfortable bed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise me on the ranks of the people that gave their blood and their life for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So somebody outside of this religion, for example, might not see any benefit in you dreaming about something that you could never attain. But the Prophet ﷺ, he gave us ample evidence and ample encouragement to the contrary, where we should be thinking about these types of things, the highest levels. I'll give you two examples as well of times where the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged companions to aim for the highest that they can. And when they have the opportunity to ask Allah for something, they should ask for the very best. Once was when the Prophet ﷺ was interacting with a very young companion by the name of Rabi'a ibn Ka'b. And he was a very young child, maybe between 8 to 12 years old. So he's just a little kid. And the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted to give him a gift. And the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't know what to give him. So he thought to himself, maybe I'll ask Rabi'a and he can tell me what he wants. So the Prophet ﷺ, he went up to Rabi'a ibn Ka'b, who's just a young boy, and he said, Sadni, ask me for anything. And when the Prophet ﷺ says that, he means literally ask me for anything and I will make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and try my utmost to enable you to have that. So you can literally ask the Prophet ﷺ for whatever you want. I mean, there's no limitations, no conditions. I mean, it's once in a lifetime opportunity. And you can ask for anything from the dunya or the hereafter. So he tells Rabi'a ibn Ka'b, Sadni, ask me for anything. So Rabi'a ibn Ka'b, he thinks about it for a while and he starts thinking to himself, okay, what could he want? And you can put yourself in the same position. What would you ask? And understand this is a young child, 8 to 12 years old, very young, like a little kid. So you could ask for something trivial if you wanted to, and that's his choice, right? Because he's a little kid. So you could ask for something like chocolate milk, for example. I would think that's a pretty wasted opportunity, but it's his choice if he wants that, right? He could ask for $5. It might be better if he asked for bigger things, like $1 million or land or things of the akhirah. And in fact, he does ask for the very best. So he looks to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, my request to you is to be your companion in Jannah. So again, the highest of paradise, to be next to you in Jannah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, you don't want anything else? He says, no, that's the only thing that I want. So he says, help yourself attain that by بِكَثْرَةِ السُّجُودِ, by praying a lot and consistently. In a different situation, once the Prophet ﷺ was visiting the Bedouins, the outskirts of the city, and he was interacting with an Arabi, which is a Bedouin Arab. And the Prophet ﷺ was actually in his house, and the Bedouin Arab was playing host to the Prophet ﷺ. So he gave him some things to eat and some things to drink, and the Prophet ﷺ was very grateful for that. So he told him, if you ever come to the city, then you come to my house and I'll be your host and you can be my guest. So one day the man ended up coming to the city for business, and he decided to stop at the house of the Prophet ﷺ to take him up on his offer. So the man knocked on the house of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ let him in, and the Prophet ﷺ gave him some things to eat and some things to drink. And now he was playing his host. At the end of it, the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted to be a really generous host, so he decided again he was going to give this man a gift. But he didn't know what to give him, and this man is an adult. So he decides he'll ask this man, maybe he knows what he wants, and the Prophet ﷺ can help him attain that. So he went up to the companion and he said, Sadni, ask me for anything that you want, and I will do my utmost. I'll make dua for it, and I'll do my utmost to enable it to materialize. So the man thought to himself for a while, what is he going to ask the Prophet ﷺ? And this man didn't ask as great a thing as Rabi'a ibn Ka'b did. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ, he said, maybe a donkey, like something to ride. because that would really help me in my life. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, is that all you're going to ask for? Like, you can ask for anything. And then the man thought about it for a while, and he said, also a dog, because the dog can guard the donkey and guard my house. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, okay, one more time. You can ask, we'll get you both of those things. But you have one more chance. Ask me for anything that you want, and we'll get it for you. So the man, he started thinking, and he couldn't think of anything else. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, are you unable to be like Ajuzi Bani Israel? Are you unable to be like the woman from Bani Israel? So the man, he didn't know the story of the woman of Bani Israel. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told him the story of the woman of Bani Israel. And so the story is that during the time of Musa alayhi salam, he gathered all the people from Bani Israel, and they were living in a certain area, and he wanted to move to a different area. So he told them all to get ready for this long journey, and they're basically leaving the territory where they're at in order to go to another territory. So everybody got ready, and some of the people from Bani Israel, they told the Prophet Musa a.s. we're ready to leave, but we can't leave until we also take the body of Yusuf a.s. with us. Because they said that our great-great-grandfathers, when Yusuf a.s. was on his deathbed, he made us promise that if we ever leave this area, that we also take his grave with us. And so we can't leave until we take that grave with us. So Musa a.s. he said, okay, let's find the grave and then let's take it with us. But they said the only problem is nobody knows where the grave is except for one old elderly lady, Ajuz. So Musa a.s. he said he went up he found that lady, and he asked her to point and indicate where the grave of Yusuf a.s. is so that they can take it with them. So this lady, she said, I'll tell you where the grave is if you can grant one request of mine. And Musa a.s. he didn't like that she was placing this condition, but he said, okay, tell me your request. She said, I'll tell you where the grave is if you can make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I have the prophets as my companions in Jannah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Musa alayhi salam at that moment that her request has been granted. And all she did is she had this firm determination. We don't know anything about her history as being a great scholar or anything like that, but she had her aim set very high, and she simply asked the Prophet Musa alayhi salam to make dua for it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he granted that. And there's a lot of examples from the companions who the Prophet also encouraged them to aim high, and there were things that seemed impossible and unrealistic at their time, but they actually manifested in their life. We don't have time to go through all of them, so I'll pause right here, and I encourage every single one of us, whether it's dunya matters or akhirah matters, to aim for things that are of the utmost highest. Even if we don't see how they're going to manifest, we should aim for the what, even if we don't know how the how is going to actually play out. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. عباد الله إن الله يأمركم بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. وأوفوا بعهد الله إذا عاهدتم ولا تنقضوا الأيمان بعد توكيدها قد جعلتم الله عليكم كفيلا والله يعلم ما تفعلون. وأقم الصلاة.